Hi everyone, my name is Lauren Moore, Manager of Live Content at AVIXA, and welcome to the March Conferencing and Collaboration Power Hour, where corporate technology managers and integrators can get the latest on key developments and trends for your digital workplace. Today, we're talking about Livestreaming 201. This webinar is brought to you by our series sponsor, BlueJean, and our moderator today is Annette Sandler, Director of Live Content at AVIXA. Before I hand it over to Annette, there's a few housekeeping items. For those viewing live, today's webinar qualifies for 1 CTS and CTSD credit. Please allow 5 to 7 business days for that to show up on your transcripts, and for any issues, please email webinars@avixa.org. During the webinar today, all attendees will be placed on mute. The event chat icon on the speech bubble in the right-hand sidebar, and that's where you can communicate with all attendees. In that, please introduce yourself in the event chat and let us know who you are, where you're from, and what experience you have with live streaming. Closed captioning is available for the webinar. If you'd like to turn on captions, click the CC button on the lower left-hand corner. If you have questions for the panel today, please enter those into the Q&A window where your fellow attendees can upvote your question. The Q&A icon is the last icon on the right-hand sidebar. We'll take questions from the audience after the panel discussion is complete. You'll have access to this recording within 5 business days at avixa.org/webinars. That's all I have for now. Annette, I'll hand it over to you to get started.
Thanks, Lauren. So I'm Annette. As Lauren mentioned, I'm the Director of Live Content for AVIXA. And that means I'm responsible for bringing our audience new technology, trends, updates through our webinars and trade show education. Right now, that means a lot of virtual and live streamed events. So we have a great panel here today to dig into how can we take our live streams to the next level. To get started, I'd like to ask each panelist to introduce themselves. Jesse, we'll start with you.
Hello, I'm Jesse Miller, General Manager at Midtown Video. We're a broadcast and AV integrator firm out of Miami, Florida. Our history is sort of in the broadcast production market, so we're building lots of television production studios in addition to your conference rooms, auditoriums, and sound systems.
Thanks, Jesse. Rob, you're up next.
Hi, Rob Woods with BlueJeans by Verizon. Been with the company since the beginning of the company, and have held a number of positions all centered around customer experience, all the way from customer support engineer all the way up to VP of sales engineer. Nice to join you all.
Thanks, Rob. And Jeffrey, over to you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jeffrey Powers. I'm a YouTuber, live influencer, and live streamer over at geekazine.com. I also work with a few groups and working on live streams, including a couple Facebook groups, one called Livestream Masters, and of course everything you can find at geekazine.com.
Thanks, Jeffrey. So Rob, first question. Let's level set here. What is the difference between video streaming, live streaming, and virtual events?
Great question. Really need to break that down into a couple of different components. Live streaming, it could be live audio streaming, could be live video streaming, could be live video and audio streaming. So that's what live streaming is. Video streaming is just the concept of streaming video into the ether, the internet, or even a private internet, where someone has the ability to view that stream live. And the other item is really around the concept of, virtual events can happen with a live audience and then be broadcast out to the internet or people remotely to view and participate live. So those are the 3 concepts that we typically see inside the event space at BlueJeans, but I'm sure it's absolutely the same with YouTube or Twitter or one of those streaming services as well.
So in AV, we're all a bunch of gearheads, and I want to put this question to each of you. What are some of the key hardware requirements that you need for a successful live stream, both on the streaming side and the receiving side? Jeffrey, what are your favorite things?
Favorite things? There's the thing about for me is that it changes from event to event. Like for instance, on a typical day, I'm on a panel like this, so it's a little bit different than my morning call. I'm on a morning call with a bunch of AV professionals where we kind of set up all our microphones and cameras to make them look good and sound good. But it really depends on what type of event that you're doing here. Bottom line is audio is always king. You can always be forgiven if your video is not perfect, if it's not lined up properly. The only time is if you're really trying to show something. Like if I was trying to explain how this mug works, then I want to have some good video to see it, and I definitely don't want to have a virtual background that could just completely destroy the actual product that I'm showing off here. Basically, sending clients at home video kits sometimes is a great way to make sure that you have the control over what they have for audio and video. But for the most part, depending on what you the level of production, how much budget you have for the production, and things like that, that's basically what's going to fill up where you're going to go with cameras, with microphones, and with in-ear systems, so you don't have speakers feeding back to you.
Jesse, can you give us a little more of a breakdown, particularly on the audio side? What gear are you using?
On the audio side for live streaming, as close as a microphone can get to a mouth, it's going to sound better, right? You'll get less room, so you want wireless lavalier microphones on your talent. In a podcast situation where you're doing audio only, it's much easier to get like a nice condenser mic on a boom, 6 inches away from the person. But when they're on camera, you gotta figure out how to hide it in their shirt, something like this. It becomes very complicated, particularly in a virtual event where maybe you've got remote panelists and maybe you've got an on-studio, on-camera host, and then you've got audience members that are watching from a Blue Jeans platform or some other kind of software conferencing codec. So there are all kinds of sound signals that need to go in certain locations, but also all kinds of sound signals that shouldn't go in certain locations, like Jeffrey alluded to, getting a nice in-ear monitor for the on-camera host. You got to make sure that you've got the remote panelist in his ear, but not his own mic in his ear. And then whatever he's saying needs to go back to certain people. But it takes a multi-bus audio mixer and a talented engineer on the board to get all of that stuff right. And something else when it comes to live streaming specifically, one of the things I caution my clients is use a video camera. There's a lot that you can do with these very nice mirrorless and DSLR type cameras lately in terms of film production. But if you're doing live streaming, it assumes two things. Number one, at least one camera is going to be connected to an encoder for streaming. And it suggests the second thing, that there's probably going to be multiple cameras at once, multi-camera production. Well, even though live streaming is sort of newish, television production is not new. And there is a host of best practices that you can use, like an ergonomic tripod with 2 arms and rear zoom and focus controls so that the operator can spend 3 hours, 4 hours, even just 45 minutes, comfortably operating without their hands on the lens. And the cameras themselves, they have an SDI or an HDMI output so that it can connect to a switcher or an encoder. You start getting into these like, oh, my Sony Alpha is great. Yes, it's great for video production, but trying to match several of them up and connecting the little micro HDMI cables to it to get that connected to a switcher or encoder, it becomes problematic. And luckily, there are plenty of video-centric, like long-form video cameras that have the same optical qualities as these mirrorless and DSLR cameras that still come with the ergonomic and the video output connection types that make them useful for streaming.
Rob, I see you nodding along. Yeah.
Yeah. So on that, I absolutely agree that you do want to have the ability to be on video, because more than half of our communication is done non-verbally, and it would be really easy for me to jump in and say yes, I agree, but that would have just thrown off Jesse or Jeffrey away from their talk tracks. So you need that ability to do nonverbal communication as well, which is the nodding of a head. So that's where the camera comes in. Specifically for hardware on our side, you absolutely need a very strong compute resource. It could be a high-powered, high-end Macintosh or a very high-end Windows laptop. And just to make sure that everybody is connected is probably one of the most simplest, easiest ways to have a successful event. Take away the bandwidth requirements. Those aren't necessarily hardware, but the hardware you're running affects those bandwidths.
So Jesse, you mentioned, and you as well, Jeff, you guys have both shipped out drop kits to remote participants. What equipment and setup are you providing remote speakers to help capture their best audio and video? And when does it make sense to do this? You're going to have some meetings that you really want to make sure that your executives have high quality audio and video, and some meetings where maybe that's overkill. How do you guide folks on the difference between those?
I don't think it's ever overkill. The question is, how much resources can you commit to the drop kits? So, for example, in some situations where an organization was doing their annual sales meeting and the attendees had to become virtual panelists, we shipped out a little Westcott $200 ring light and like a $400 USB camera with a nice array microphone. There were 5 panelists, so they spent about, just under $5,000 to make sure that those people attending had great USB peripherals. One of the attendees, they had a late model Mac, and that camera was fine, so they were able to skip the camera, but they still sent out the light, for example. In other situations where people absolutely must look their best, that's when you're going to send them something like a Canon C200 or maybe even a 4K camera on a tripod with a lavalier microphone and then a USB interface so that they could take their production level equipment and get it connected to their Blue Jeans USB interface as a webcam.
So the more important thing is, once again, we're talking about level of engagement that you want in there. Like, for instance, I'll give you a good example. Last year at the Oscars, they came out with this big article where they talked about all these systems that they shipped out from to different locations. And when they did the show, some of them were great. Some of them kind of fell flat, and partly because of internet, partly because of location, partly because some people didn't get their boxes or anything like that. But more to the point that the person that is being on camera is most likely the person that's setting up the unit. So the most important thing of any type of kit like this would be something that would be easy to set up and possibly controllable by you. And that's what my kit is that I send out to people. It's a device that I can actually can get into and control if I need to make that happen. Now, for somebody to actually have that happen, to be able to do that, it's going to cost some money, because we build a kit that could get lost tomorrow. We send it across the country. They might not return it back. It might come back in damaged form. So it's not the best solution in an everyday type of stream. But when you have the ability to do it, you can really work on making sure that they're set up correct, that they are in your lines, and since you know the audio, since you know the video of that camera and that microphone, you can set it up as best as you can.
There's a real benefit to the fact that we're preparing them for a virtual meeting, right? Because you already know there's going to be some kind of video conference. So you can get them on the phone or on a Zoom or on a Blue Jeans conference and sort of walk them through the process. And you just, okay, now it's time to go to your settings and change from your built-in camera to the camera we shipped you, and bam, things start to really look good. It's a fun process.
I think a lot of those cameras, the cost of the cameras is critical to the production quality of that live stream as well. But let's be honest, even the Logitechs of the world are making really good USB peripherals right now. Personally, I'm running a Logitech Brio at my house, and I've been doing so for the last couple of years. And it is by far one of the best simple USB-based cameras I've ever used. And I know that in the pandemic, there was access to these USB camera situations where everybody was forced to work from home and everybody needed a USB-based camera. But they're definitely better more often than not than just the simple embedded cameras that are in all of our laptops, if you will, right? Or the embedded cameras in the iMacs, if those are still a thing. I just know that having a USB camera allows you the flexibility to position it wherever you want. Mine's on a tripod, and I really want to have that capability versus having an embedded camera that's just above the keyboard. I know we joked about it before about it being the knuckle cam or the god cam or the peasant cam, if you will. But there are companies out there that just don't think about where they're placing the cameras on their machines. So that's why I've always been led to these flexible USB-based peripherals as well.
You know, an interesting frustration we've encountered lately is particularly the Galaxy cameras and then the iPhone 12 and later, they're making these like really fantastic looking images. And so we'll be interfacing with executives that are attending their shareholder meetings or what have you remotely. And we're tasked with delivering these virtual events. And we'd say something like, well, we want to ship you this and that camera to make sure you look there. Well, they say, well, I already look great. I have this awesome camera on my Galaxy. It's the same issue that I have with the Sony mirrorless and the DSLR cameras. Yes, those cameras look fantastic in production. But what we're trying to do is get it to be a component in a bigger system so that we can deliver the entire, show to the audience. And so just being a fantastic camera doesn't make it the right tool necessarily, just like not being the perfect camera may still make something the right tool. It's about the connections. It's about the ergonomics. You mentioned a USB camera being able to place it anywhere. That's very useful. Somebody might say, Jesse, what are you going to send me a C200 for? I'd have to have a tripod. All I have is like my desk and the wall. I got no place to put that.
Yeah, we're all competing with the amount of content that we're consuming these days. And we're all trying to put together things that look as good as what we see on TV. So, Jeffrey, you're the closest to the content side of this. What are the current best practices for producing engaging content that technologists need to be aware of?
That's a pretty big order and a great question. The biggest thing is a lot of people are starting to realize that you're now inviting people into your home. Whether you have a studio set up like I do, or you have an office set up like Jesse has, or what Rob has, you're basically inviting people into a space or an area. So, and some people have a problem with that. Now, some of these spaces, some people have some really nice homes where they can set up a room where they can have the camera there all the time, the lights up all the time, the microphone up all the time. And then there's some people that are in things like New York City apartment where space is pretty much small. It's just not possible to have more than a desk and a laptop sometimes. But even though you might have something like that, being able to set up your area to kind of give you that feng shui like the rest of your area is a very important key. And of course, presenting to people is just as important. Like for instance, as you can see with all of us, we have our cameras at eye level. We don't have them on a laptop pointing up. I basically call it 3 different levels. You have eye level mode, you have God level mode, and you have peasant level mode. Peasant level is when you're looking down at your laptop at that webcam because they're looking up at you. And then, of course, you have God mode, which means that your camera's above your monitor. You're looking up, and they're looking at you like they're the God. And so that's one of the important things is to kind of put everything into an order so people feel more comfortable talking back and forth with you for what you do. And, of course, I always like in a shot, I always like to go breast to top ahead. as you can see, I'm moving my hands, and you know that presidents have been trained to learn how to use their hands. So when they say stuff like this, it doesn't get taken the wrong way, and it actually drives certain statements, certain movements to go in the right direction rather than wrong direction. So best practice, these are some of the best practices that people will need to do to kind of convey a message. Otherwise, people are going to look at their shots and go, you know, do I trust this person? Because I don't know this person. It's just a person behind a screen. And there's no tactile feel. There's nothing. So I need to trust it by what I see and hear.
You bring up some really interesting points about developing a rapport with the viewer and about creating trustworthiness as the personal presentation. Particularly in a live streaming situation, when you get out of just the meeting and you're transmitting an event to perhaps a sea of viewers, millions and billions of viewers. One guiding principle you want to consider is that it's got to be better than being there. Because of the pandemic, we'd settle for just being there. But traditionally, the goal of televised broadcast is to be better than being there. Just ask any pastor at a church, right? It's not enough just to be a fly on the wall. Engaging production should have multiple angles so that you can cut into the close-up for the dramatic moment, that you can pan out and show the breadth and the expanse of the venue to impress the largeness of the situation. Get a 45-degree cutaway every now and then to keep the viewer engaged. So in meetings, yes, it's important to have a nice frame and try to stay within it and develop your relationship with the viewer this way. But as a whole, the goal of production should be delivering a better, at least as good an experience as being there. But I suggest better than being there. You've got the tools to create lasting impressions that reality doesn't allow for. If you're just one person sitting in one place watching the thing, you'll get one. But think of sports television production. The nature of complicated, sophisticated production systems is to enhance the experience for the viewer, to make it better than.
Personally, I was really impressed with the inaugural celebration broadcast. I thought that was just a stunning example of what you could do, bringing people together and putting on a new type of celebration that maybe was actually better than being there, because a lot more people could join in that together. So when we're talking about bringing this all together, creating this amazing experience because people still need to feel connected, what are the roles that go into this live stream? And Rob, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so that's a really important thing to ask. People determining what their roles are going to be in these live streams, events, virtual events, what have you. And what we typically do is we like to think about it in three sort of phases. There's the off-camera controllers of the event, or the moderators of the event, and they're really handling everything from the experience for all roles, whether it's chat, Q&A, muting and unmuting of cameras, switching cameras. In the case of the events platform from Blue Jeans, the promoting and demoting people from active presenter to passive attendees and vice versa. All of those things are absolutely critical from a control perspective. But then you get on to the on-screen role, right? Those people need to be really geared up and understand, hey, is this microphone going to work? Is this camera going to work? Is this lighting right? How am I going to be perceived by the audience? And they need to have their talk track or their presentation track down pat, right? You don't want somebody fumbling for words or things like that. So that's a really important component as well. So there's the controller or the moderators of the events or the live streams. Then there's the component of the presentation on camera capability. But then let's not forget about the audience, right? What is their role in this whole thing? In my experience, it's always been like, I need to consume as much information about this topic as possible. And what does the presenter or the on camera screen's message mean to me? So it needs to be relevant for me to be engaged. What I like to see a lot about is the engagement tools that these solutions have in place, whether it's a social media channel with the thumbs up and liking feedback from the audience, or simple poll questions or surveys at the end of an event that you can inject into the event itself. That just brings a lot more engagement from the audience, and it keeps the presenters engaged with their audience as well.
You know what else engages audiences? Shout outs. Hello from Greece. Hello from Brown University.
That's
Hello
right.
from
That's right.
Ohio State University and Atlanta, and our friends watching from Diversified. You guys, thank you for tuning in. It's great to have you. Some very good questions in the Q&A session as well.
Yeah, so that's a good point too, Jesse.
Yeah, we do, like I said, we do a morning call of top audio video professionals. And we started, actually, it's going to be 1 year on March 25th that this, we've been doing this every single day since March 25th, which is amazing. And from then, we learned how to create roles from just in a Zoom perspective. One person actually does switching because we do project it out to YouTube. And so they do the switching, so they know who's going to be on screen when it comes time. The people that are watching this is a webinar style rather than just a meeting room. So they'll be able to call up screens, they'll be able to call up presenters, and keep the show flowing. There are people that are also working behind the scenes. We actually have a computer that's dedicated that does nothing but gathers what the audio sounds like and projects it back through a meter, so we can control our sound, so we sound good and look good as best as possible. So roles can be almost anything, and it really depends on the platform that you're using.
Yeah, you don't want you don't want the audio coming through too hot or too soft. That's for sure, and you want it to gate when it's needed.
Definitely, Jeffrey alluded to it earlier that you can get by with video that is somewhat compromised. But as soon as the audio is compromised, communication ceases.
So one of the tools that we all, I think, have started using to a greater effect over the past couple months is breakout rooms. How do you use breakout rooms in your event setup? Let's talk about it on the speaker side and then also on the audience side as a potential engagement tool for them.
I'll go, unless somebody else wants. So I think that breakout sessions are really important. It allows, from a virtual event perspective, to allow people to just check in at a virtual desk and pick what virtual booths they want to visit. And it allows them to wander freely between the home base, which is that first initial check-in, and any topic they want to see at a scheduled time. That's the way I see these breakout sessions inside events being very effective, because you don't want to, hey, you got to be here at this time and you need to look this way and you need those sort of, that's just too strict. What we want to do when we get to the virtual event or virtual conference scenarios is give people the freedom to wander about freely and go from space to space to space without having to always go back to the home, to that, point A to check in sort of scenario.
I have a slightly different take on it. Annette, you mentioned watching the inauguration, and sort of in a response to better than being there. Something very cool about the inauguration is that there was no there. It was everywhere. There were people from everywhere, so you couldn't be there. And the only way to consume that was to view the live stream as the viewer, the way the producers of the event intended. And so as far as I am concerned, yeah, in certain meeting scenarios, you want to have breakout rooms to personalize the interaction to feel like you're engaging with folks. But in some ways, the opposite is true. In some ways, what you just want to do is push the viewer count so that one event has millions of people watching simultaneously, experiencing that one thing. Is the breakout room important? Absolutely, and very useful, and it creates smaller environments where people can be a part of something a little bit more personalized, a little more narrowcasting. It depends on the event. If it's a live streaming event where you're pushing a concert or a sporting event or something like this, I think to me it's more about pushing the viewer count in the main room as far as it can go.
I totally agree with what Jesse just said. It really depends on your event. And I'll give you a couple examples here. First of all, CES just happened, Consumer Electronics Show. I was actually being my role of reporter, getting content, lots of videos and interviews, just like I normally do at a CES. Zoom was used in a lot of different situations with rooms. And what happened was we went into the main room, and that's where we would get shuttled into different breakout rooms from there. Now, if you wanted to just check out their spiel, their event, what the product they have, you can go into one room. If you needed to talk to somebody one-on-one, they would shuttle you to another room. Third one would be somebody like me who actually did one-on-one interviews, so I could talk with the top level and get some content for my channel. Then I was going to another room. Now that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is just like what Jesse said, is something like the concert. Maybe this is a more quiet concert and you want to be able to listen to it and not have all that chatter. So maybe there's a room that's a quiet room. Maybe there's a room that's like where people can actually interact back and forth and say what they're thinking. The third way is just like if anybody's ever gone to a conference, you speak at a conference. And let's say you go to Vegas. So you fly to Vegas, you get there, there's a car that meets you there, that car takes you to the hotel, you check into the hotel, you get your food, you get your drink, whatever, you go down to the conference, you check into a green room. That green room, you can then sit there and prepare what you're going to say, and then you're shuttled into the conference where you're going to say your stuff, then you're back out, and then you're getting in the car and you go back to the airport and you're off and flying. In this situation, I know people that are working on ways to bring shuttling green rooms into play. So you could have a room full of people that are ready for the next presenter, and they're getting shuttled from room to room to room. One that's actually preparing them with what do you have in your background? What do you have for your audio? What do you have for your video? Next one, is your hair on straight? Was what not there? And the next one, somebody that's preparing you what to say, what not to say, and then you get put into the actual room where you're talking. You might even go to another room that will answer. You'll then be able to answer questions, and then go out from there. So there's different ways that you can approach this. It really depends on the event that you want to present on. You want to present. Yeah, that's it.
So that's really working with the speakers. What is the best way to effectively prepare speakers before an event? Do you find that prep sessions are required? And are they required on the day of? Are they logging on early, or is it something that you should do a few days in advance?
Doing it in advance is always a good idea. Having a prep session before you actually do the session is great. We did a prep session a few days ago where you guys got to see what you were going to be seeing at this event right here. For me, when I prepare anybody, and sometimes it's going to be last minute, there's not much you can do on there. Like I said, the CES interviews, I jumped in. I can only work with the clay that I'm given. So I got to work with that. In order for me to do that, I prepare myself with different things. Like, for instance, I will come into something, like let's say I'm interviewing Jesse and Rob. I would probably give them a small little script that I put together that's basically saying what the event's about, why I'm doing this, what they're going to see, how it's going to, the expectations of the interview or the whatever we're doing, and then some of the different things that happen. Like, for instance, at the end of this event, we're all going to stay silent until I say that we're clear. That way, there's no awkwardness. You don't have to say goodbye or anything like that. And be able to kind of put together a more packaged area. You want to prepare them on the goals, and you want to also prepare them on what to say and what not to say. Because, as you might have heard, I was a little bit earlier, even right now, I'm kind of stumbling on words, trying to remember what to say. So just kind of prepare them, give them some key words that they want to inject into a speech. That way they're not fighting their brain, because lots of things are happening right now. I'm looking at you through a camera, which is basically a black hole, and then around me is a screen with a whole bunch of text around with questions and things that I want to talk about and stuff like that. And that's inundated. And my focus, I want to be looking at you. I don't want to be looking here, because you don't see, when I look here, you don't see me eye to eye. I want to look to you eye to eye as best as possible. And so these are the things that I prepare speakers for. So if you can do it a week before, sometimes going a little bit too far is probably not a good idea, because then they'll kind of forget what's going on, or they tear down the camera, set it back up, and they have to start all over again. But if you can do something before an event, I would do it every single time.
There's definitely no substitute for preparation, rehearsal. If you want to pull out a trick, share a screen or something like that, you'll want to have done it so far already.
I also think that, while you might want to do a prep session on the platform that you're going to be using and going over the content of it, etc., I think it's the on-camera personalities that need to be familiar with, just like Jeffrey said, stop from fighting against your brain and fighting against the inundation of all the things you see around you. And there's some really great tools out there to help people with that. One that's coming right to mind right now is this concept of Toastmasters, and they focus specifically on public speaking, delivering presentations that resonate with the audience, giving you the ability to speak confidently and succinctly about the topic without using filler words. I mean, filler words are absolutely natural. And it's really weird that we're talking about this right now, because I just did a session internally at Blue Jeans about this, where people just need to be comfortable speaking like they would face-to-face. And for one reason or another, we're not able to do that right now. So we need to be able to deliver content in speeches that come across as natural.
Absolutely true. And it's something I was working on a presentation recently, and I caught myself using the word so a lot as a filler word to launch myself into the next slide. You do it once or twice, and that's okay. When I saw that on the recording that I was doing it on every slide or every other slide, I went back and I re-recorded that. So that's something you need to be very cognizant of when you're speaking live. I see that we've got a few more questions coming in, and in about 5 more minutes here, we're going to get to audience questions. So if you have a question, please put that in the Q&A box now. I want to go back to Jesse, and we talked about some of the USB peripherals and upgrading the gear. So talk me through a broadcast quality production gear, replacing the webinar computer with a built-in webcam. What are the steps you go through there?
That's a great question. We faced this challenge where we've got several installed studios. We're catering to either call-letter stations or big corporations that have their own internal marketing team where they'll have built multi-camera production studio, and then they'll come to us and say, okay, how do I get this on my Blue Jeans meeting? How do I get this on my Teams call? Right? They've invested a significant amount of gear to make really high quality productions, and as it turned out, one-way communication was no longer the thing. We don't want to stream to YouTube only. We want to be in our meetings where our employees, our shareholders, or whomever else can participate, and to get that done privately and in a two-way scenario where they can speak back, it's these software conferencing codecs. And so luckily, there are these USB interfaces that will take an SDI or an HDMI baseband signal, and just like an internet encoder would turn it into, an MPEG or RTMP stream or whatever, these USB converters will turn it into a webcam. And wouldn't you know it, right at the pandemic when everything went virtual, there was a run on USB converters, but now they've all caught up. Some of my favorites like Aja makes the UTAP. Epiphan has the AV.io series of HDMI or DVI to USB grabbers. And now, really, China is pushing tons of this stuff out for way less expensive. Looks like a little USB thumb drive, but it's got an HDMI input on it. So that in an instant takes all of your broadcast production quality gear and makes it instantly recognized as a webcam on your, maybe it's a souped up PC, maybe it's just a laptop that's running the WebEx. The gap is bridged.
Rob, what do you think are a few of the key items you always make sure you have in place prior to live streaming a broadcast?
Oh, goodness. So first and foremost is good internet, right? Make sure you've got good internet, because I know that in the prep session we had, my internet went down, right? So make sure you have a place that you're with stable internet. And I can't speak to that. I think all of us are struggling with that right now in one way, shape, or form with the work from home scenarios that we're in. But I think beyond that, you've got this concept of preparation, right? You want to make sure that everybody that's going to be on that in their respective roles is prepared accordingly. And then during the event, whether it's a full production event with camera switching and things of that nature that go into it, to a live studio audience or virtual studio audience, you want to have solid sound quality and first and foremost sound, but you also want to have correlating video that syncs up with that sound. You don't want to have this, lip synchronization issue that I think we're all familiar with, regardless of what platform we use, whether it's Zoom, Blue Jeans, Teams, GoTo, WebEx, a whole bunch of them. They're all subject to various degrees of lip synchronization and sound quality issues. Now, I think that everybody in the collaboration or live streaming industry has done a great job of controlling that audio and video experience for their audience. But I think that there is still room to improve. When you come to what is good to have or nice to have or need to have, that's really dependent on the audience that you're promoting to, that you're presenting to. They may say, hey, look, I don't need to necessarily view this on my phone. I'm looking at it from a 32 or 50-inch or 70-inch flat screen in my office. Well, that changes the dynamic, right? At that point, you want to have high-quality video pushed out to those devices. So it's really driven on the needs of what the audience will be asked to join from. I was typing an answer to somebody about how this event is being produced. I get into the roles, like the moderators, they're the ones that are controlling the experience. The presenters, they're the one that are the focus of that event. And then there's the attendees and the audience. They're in a view only mode. But that's not necessarily every single scenario. You need to take into account that specific topic and that specific audience that you're going to be presenting to, and make sure that the content resonates with them.
I think you make a really good point about how the audience is consuming it. And I think that oftentimes the type of production you're able to put out is directly related to the budget that you have. And I'm really interested, what kind of content, what kind of production quality can you achieve at different budget levels? Because depending on the audience and the outcomes you're going for, you're going to have different options available to you. So this will be our last question before we take some of the audience questions. So Jeffrey, let's start with you.
Well, the beauty of this is even in the last 5 years, the prices have changed dramatically. Whereas a camera would cost $200, $300, $400 just to get, you can now get cameras, even used cameras, for pretty low prices. So you can set things up and have some pretty good quality, even if it's not 4K, 8K, or whatever. You've got something that can go 720 to 1080p. You're really good. to go. There is a lot of people that still use phones for a lot of things and tablets for a lot of their conference calls, and a lot of them do have some pretty good qualities to it. Broadcast qualities, maybe not as much, but I've seen I think we're getting used to that whole idea that somebody can do an interview, especially with late night. Somebody can do an interview from their iPad or their iPhone or their computer, and it's somewhat acceptable. You can always how in the family to help you with certain things, like asking them what type of cameras are out there, what how their friends are doing their TikTok videos and stuff like that, and maybe see how you incorporate in here. And then finally, think about this, because even though we think that we're now on a cusp of going back to normalcy, we're really not. We're gonna be doing this for the next couple of years, and there's a lot of people that are still asking the question, what happens at the next pandemic? And so one thing that I've been telling people is start thinking about it in your home budget. You know, if you go to find a house, perfect example, we go to find a house and you find out that somebody's already put Ethernet jacks throughout the house. You're going, oh, that's great. Now I can get my network going really easy. I don't have to punch holes in the wall. But think of it this way. If somebody says, oh, they already have it set up, so you have a stream room, a camera, lights to go everywhere, that would be a good selling point for anything. Plus, once again, I talk about the feng shui of your home. This adds to it because you have an area where you're doing the project that you need to do, and then you have the family room and you have the bedroom. None of them will have to cross over.
Jesse, what are your thoughts? What kind of production can you achieve for all the different budget levels?
I really would like. I'd like to just quickly pick up on something that Jeffrey hinted at, and it's like post-pandemic. Really, we've all learned that at least half of the meetings that we used to take in person could be taken in video, you know, in Blue Jeans, in Zoom, and what have you. And so I think that a major focus of employers might be the personal video studio per desk. And it leads right into the budget question, because I mean, for under about $2,000, you could outfit all of your really important sort of manager level desks with some high quality web conferencing gear. And if you wanted to step it up to say like 10,000, now you're talking about 4K production value with, you know, interesting LED lights that don't take up a lot of space. And with the right consulting, with the right engineering design, you could turn any space into a broadcast space, into a streaming space. Not that you have to, but we certainly hope you do it, Midtown Video.
I think that the home office is not going away anytime soon, right? I think that these large companies that traditionally wanted people to be in the office and collaborate effectively. Look, I miss the office. I miss going to the coffee maker, the water cooler, and being able to have access to a bunch of different engineers that I wouldn't necessarily be able to walk up to their desks and ask them a question. I miss that. But I think that the juice is not worth the squeeze when it comes to the cost. To open up a physical space, there's a lot of cost associated with that. And these conferencing rooms that you were talking about before, I absolutely agree. It's something that could easily be done for under $1,000 for the executive's desks. They don't necessarily have to be, you know, the Cisco or Polycom devices. You've got things like WebRTC that are available on virtually any laptop, any browser. So just wanted to throw that out there.
So let's go to some of the audience questions. And this first one I see here, not a question, but a suggestion, one which I like. A future event, a real nuts and bolts example of an actual live stream session. The trick, I think, with this one is you have to get the cameras behind all of us speakers right now, and to show what we're seeing on our screens, and all of the different outputs. But yes, this is something we can definitely look into, how an actual live stream is put together in a webinar. Definitely.
We've
You want
definitely
to see a production? You want to see a production? Look at this right here.
Wow.
Here's part of my studio, and
Okay,
this is coming from a
Jeffrey's already ready to
PTZ
go.
cam. So we've got it right here. We could actually do this fairly easy. So bring it on.
Excellent.
When presenting a case study, you want to bring your schematic with you. You know, you want to bring your sources and destinations list. And what it really hints at is every production needs one of those. When you're thinking it through, you want to be describing, you know, in your mind and ideally on paper, especially if you're working with a team and everybody's going to sort of work on the same studio, you got to map it out. And so it's fun, you know, to do case studies on successful ones where you've got the schematic ready and you can say, here's where our cameras were, this is how we routed our audio to here and there, and these were the wireless paths, and this is what the wires were, and here's how many network switches we had to connect together. And definitely, I'm into that.
I think that there's a level of overkill that's there. And again, this comes down to what the desired effect is, the audience, right? If it's going to be for 1-to-1 or 1-to-5, you know, web conferencing or video conferencing calls, you don't need all the gear that Jeffrey showed you there. But absolutely, for production purposes, you very well may need that much gear on the back end.
It depends who you're trying to impress.
That's it.
Even on a 3-person call, if you really want to let them know that you're ready, and if you're presenting your prototype of your invention to, you know, a VC or what have you, and you have the ability to switch to your overhead cam looking straight down at it, even if there's just 3 people in the room, if you've thought that out and you've rehearsed it and can get to it like Jeff did just in a moment's notice because of his familiarity with the system and knowing how to use it, that if you need to impress somebody and they're into video, that does it. I think so. I think it does it.
Yeah. Jeffrey, you just pressed a button and switched camera sources, didn't you?
Yes, I did. So my system is set up with live streaming with a software switcher. I have hardware switchers and software switchers. And of course, yeah, I am the example, but you know, I've been doing this since 2008 from my home. I haven't gone to a 9-to-5 job. So everything that I've put together, a lot of times what I would do is I travel to places to do the video and things like that. But I was ready to put together something when this all started a year ago. And so you don't have to have all the cool gear that I have. But there are a lot of people that are showing you how to create that cool gear, how to make your own cool gear. Like, for instance, I have this camera sitting on a slider that I can go back and forth. And there's many tutorials on how to make that same slider. This was a $300 slider. You could go down to the local hardware store and make your own for $25. So there's a lot of different options here, and no two setup is going to be exactly the same.
Guys in the chat room were talking about using Stream Deck on some of their productions to, you know, add an additional layer of control. I'm sure they were thrilled to see it in your studio there.
Oh yeah, I have two Stream Decks that I'm working on right now.
We do a live stream. We call it Happy Hour on Fridays at 4:45 on YouTube, and the content of the live stream is how to build a production studio. You know, how to stream video to the internet. So we'll have people calling in from their studios and stuff like this. And usually, on the other side of this room is my TriCaster control room. But because TriCaster has NDI, and I can bring up the multi-viewer on my screen. When my technical director is not around, I have to cut the show myself from the mouse and keyboard on my monitor, and would not have happened but for the forced separation of production teams and figuring out kind of how to do it yourself and practice and streaming and failing and putting it together and learning about it. That really experimentation can get you far.
We have a question here from Eduardo, and going back to working with remote participants and remote speakers, do you include additional lights? And I think Jeffrey also shared he does include written recommendations for remote participants. So what are some of those, I see you guys each have different lighting setups. Talk a little bit about the importance of lighting for live streaming. Jesse, go for it.
Okay, all right. Luckily, there's a science, and television lighting and film lighting has been around for over 100 years. So we didn't have to invent anything new when production went to the internet. So it's 3-point lighting. You need a key so that there's some light. You need a fill to work out the shadows created by the key. And then you need a backlight or a hair light so that your shoulders get a little bit of light that separate you from your backdrop. We're all watching on a 2-dimensional screen, right? That's the magic. We're telling you I am a 3-dimensional guy, and I'm in a 3-dimensional room, but you're watching me on a 2D screen. So the real magic of television, film production, or streaming production is creating that illusion of depth. And so that's why not just a hair light, but you'll see I've got a practical that's also critical. You can see that your brain knows that my AT-AT walker is closer than my lamp is than my wall is. And yet, magically, here I am on your flat 2D screen. That's what lighting can do.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the other thing, it really depends on what you're trying to present. As you can see, Jesse has a little bit more of a warmer feel in his office than I do, because I'm working at a little bit different Kelvin lighting style lighting than he does. So it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. If, like, for instance, I have a light that does a whole bunch of different colors. So if I'm in party mode, we'll switch the color of the light to, something more party. If this was like we were doing an online, a table reading of a show or something like that, and the cops show up, I could hit a light where all of a sudden we have cop lights coming through, or ambulance lights, or maybe a storm's coming through or something like that. So lighting really depends on what you end up doing. For those people, for the remote kits, a lot of times I have a pretty dark room right now, which means I have curtains that are covering the windows, and everything's dark except for the lights that are shining on me. A lot of these rooms in people's homes are usually bright, so they don't need much lighting. So for a remote kit, something like that, it's just usually a single panel light that's just a little bit off center and as far away from the camera as possible, so they can get properly lit. That light doesn't cause any type of lens flares in the camera, and they look good, of course, on camera.
Better to look good than to feel good. And you look marvelous.
No, you look marvelous.
So we have another question in the Q&A box from Antonio. Thoughts about auto follow cameras? We're not using any in this meeting, and actually I find them very distracting, even in just regular meetings for work, even internal meetings, when someone's camera is following them around. It's not my favorite because then I'm following them with my eyes instead of with my ears and listening to what they're saying.
Yeah, I think that the auto follow cameras are almost required in a business office setting, or someone that's walking around and presenting. I will say that the Logitech Meetup and the Panacast, they all have the ability to turn that off. But for me, I'm on my Brio right now, my Logitech Brio, and for 99% of the applications required, that is sufficient for me. But in the 1% where I need a higher quality camera of broadcast quality, absolutely you need to look into these studio-esque type cameras. Someone brought up the Blackmagic Cinema Pocket Cam. That's a broadcast-esque camera that's affordable, that someone can use. I personally don't have much experience with those type of cameras, but again, for 99% of my daily use, the Logitech Brio and the Meetup and the Panacasts of the world will do sufficiently.
We actually talked about this on our morning call. By the way, the morning call is free for anybody to join in. It's called Office Hours. Alex Lindsay hosts that. And actually, yeah, one of the questions that was asked was about these roaming cameras. I've been testing lots of them. Like, for instance, this is the OBS bot which came out a couple of years ago at CES. This is the tiny version. So as you can see, this fits right on top. It can fit right on top of a monitor. It's got a magnetic mount, and of course, it'll follow me. The problem is it uses AI to detect people. So like if I raise my hand, it'll say, okay, this is the person you have to follow. If I do this, that means that it wanted to zoom in, zoom out. However, if I start doing this, it's going to get completely confused and doesn't know what to do. So with those cameras, yeah, you have a little bit of good and a little bit of bad. It really depends on what you want to do. If you're just a sitting talking head, that's fine. If I had a whiteboard behind me and I wanted to show you, the meaning of life or something like that, I definitely would want to have a camera that follows here. One more thing, a remote kit. Some of the remote kits that some of these people are building are including things like the Brio, because they have the ability to control the camera remotely. So they could center Rob and zoom in on him so they get the shot that they want to see rather than, what is perceived.
There's some interesting technologies in them. If I'm building an executive conference room for a CEO, and I know that he's not going to hire a camera guy with headphones on and a tripod to follow people, he may say, I need this camera to follow me. And so something like the old Cisco, the
Precision HDs.
Not just the Precision, but the one with the speaker in the background that had two cameras and actually cut from camera to camera and would get like the Eagle Eye Director from Polycom.
Okay.
In a conference meeting, useful to have auto following technology. If there's a lecturer at the front of the classroom and there's a podium, but he needs to pace a little bit, it's useful to have a camera that might, track a face. But depending on your production, if you're doing a live streaming event where there's multiple presenters or there's a panel discussion or something like this, like Annette indicated, it can be distracting, for someone to have one of these auto following things that's thinking like a computer, as one of our panelists said. If you're going through the expense, if you're making the investment to present an event on the internet and you want to push your viewer count up to thousands and millions, hire camera operators. Have a talk before the show. Camera 1, your responsibility is the wide shot. Camera 2, your responsibility is the close-up. Camera 3, anytime that guitarist goes into a solo, I want you on his hands. And then during the show, it's not just a camera and an operator, it's a director. It's the camera director giving the operators their cues, leading them up. Okay, start your pan. We're coming into you in 3, 2, 1. Camera 2, you're live. There is a science to it, and we can study it and learn from it and improve our production from it. You don't just have to be guessing.
So on the
that
topic
sounds like a good stuff here. Oh, sorry, Rob. I got to cut you off. We're over time here. But so I love that you guys actually talked so long that we've gone a couple minutes over. And thank you, Rob, Jesse, and Jeffrey for joining us today and going through many, many different ways for our audience to upgrade their live streams and put better streams out there in the world for everyone. And I will turn it back over to Lauren to close us out.
Great. Thanks, Annette. Wonderful job, you guys. Very informative today. We'll be back next month on April 12th to discuss choosing the right gear for our April Power Hour. And again, a special thanks to Blue Jeans for sponsoring this series. The recording will be available on avixa.org/webinars within about 5 business days. And your 1RU credit will be applied to your transcripts within 5 to 7 business days. If you have any problems, please email us at webinars@avixa.org. And a huge thank you to our speakers, Jesse, Jeffrey, Rob. You guys were awesome. Thank you. We hope you guys have a good day, and we'll see you next month.